the last topic for our Unit 3 is talking about the accessory structures of the skin. Now, these accessory structures include the hair and the nails, which are quite obvious features, but it also includes sebaceous, those oil glands, and sudoriferous glands, which are the ones I talked about in the last video. Now, these accessory structures are there to give the skin more functionality, and we can do more things by having these accessory structures associated with it. So the oil glands, or the sebaceous glands that I spoke about before, these glands are found in the dermis, of course, and they produce a type of an oil. Now this oil can be a little bit different depending on where the gland is, but the oil tends to do things like lubricate the skin, lubricate the hair. Oftentimes it produces antimicrobial substances which can reduce the growth of bacteria. And these sebaceous ducts, or these sebaceous glands, they have ducts that open up into the hair follicles, like I showed you in the last figure. So we've got these sebaceous glands, and they're named differently depending on where in the body we find them. So we can have these meibomian glands, and these are associated with the eyelashes. And then we can also have the vernix caseosa secretion. So this is produced by glands that we find on newborns. So they're accessory structures. They're a type of gland that secretes an oil, but depending on where we find them, we can call them different things. For the most part, on most regular skin, we just call them sebaceous glands. The sweat glands, those are a coiled tube with a duct. So it's an exocrine gland. You find them in the dermis, where they have to travel through the epidermis to reach the outside, but there'll be a long duct, and at the end of the duct it'll be a coiled or a twisted up tube. And inside that tube we're going to have the secretion of fluid, and the sebaceous glands, sudoriferous glands, which are the sweat glands. They also produce a salt as well. So not only can they produce water for cooling down, they often get rid of some waste. That's why if you go to the gym, for example, and you sweat a lot, and you leave your gym shirt for a while, it can start to smell bad because we have excreted some waste through the sweat. That's another way for us to remove waste. So it can do this. It's generally small amounts of dissolved particles like salt, but it can also have some metabolic waste in it as well. So this is mainly for cooling of the skin. Okay, water is released to the surface of the skin, and when the water evaporates, it pulls away the energy in order for that evaporation reaction to happen. And as it does, it pulls that energy away in heat, so that cools down the body. And we can also have specialized sweat glands that we call apocrine glands, and these release an excretion in response of stress, for example, or sexual stimulation. So these glands can become in effect, and they'll secrete something similar to sweat. Modified versions of these sweat glands include the ceruminous glands, which we find in the ear canal, and that'll produce the wax that's formed in the ear canal, which helps protect the ear canal by trapping dust and particles and all that stuff. We can have ciliary glands, which are at the edge of the eyelids, and they'll produce fluid that'll help lubricate the eyelids. And then we can have the mammary glands, of course, which are found in female mammals, which are modified to produce milk, which feeds the young. So here's a look at these glands again. On A here, you're going to see the sebaceous gland. So this whole structure here is a sebaceous gland, and it's got its duct that empties out into or next to the hair shaft, which would be right here. Over here, we're going to see a sudoriferous gland, or a sweat gland. Now, keep in mind, when we're looking at a transverse section like this, we're looking at a 2D image, right? So we can't see the coiled structure. All we're seeing is a slice through that coiled structure. So if you picture a 3D image here, these little circles that you see here, these ducts that are lined with epithelial tissue, cuboidal epithelial tissue, those are going to be the ends, the cut ends of a twisted coiled organ. So if you have an organ with a 3D shape like this, if we cut through it on one plane and then we look at it in this direction, of course you're only going to see where the openings and where the twists and stuff are those of those structures. So it can be a little bit more complicated on a 2D image when we're thinking about a 3D structure. Hair is another accessory structure, and it's a defining criteria for the class Mammalia, which we are. So it defines mammals. All mammals will have some kind of hair, from whales to bats to humans. All of these things are mammals, and of course they're all going to have hair in some form. Humans, of course, are mammals, and our body is covered with hair almost all over, hair of varying textures, thicknesses, and lengths. Hair is mostly made up of that protein that I was telling you about earlier that we find in the stratum corneum, in the epidermis. That protein is called keratin. Hair, of course, is not living, so you can cut your hair, obviously, and it doesn't hurt. There's no nerve tissue or anything like that in the hair. It's all dead cells. But it does have a living portion that's below the surface of the epidermis, in the dermis, and that's the part that divides and replicates and causes your hair to grow. Most hair follicles, so the part of the hair inside the dermis that's dividing to produce hair cells to make your hair longer, they'll have a muscle associated with it called an erector pili muscle. And what will happen is these erector pili muscles can help make the hair, instead of laying flat, so here's the surface of our skin, hair generally lays flat like this. These erector pili muscles will help the hair stand up straight. Now that happens when we are cold and you get goosebumps. If you look at your skin, there's look like little tiny bumps all over the place. Those muscles have contracted and they've made the hair stand up. And the idea is the hair standing up, it'll trap a layer of warm air closer to your body, and it'll help insulate and keep your body warm. You can also get goosebumps when you're afraid. One more accessory structure are the nails, and the nails are there to protect the fingers and the toes, and it helps us in fine grasping situations. It also helps us scratch, which is an important response to irritations of the skin. And now again, we're going to see the same protein that we found in the epidermis and the hair. It's going to be this protein called keratin. And the nails are going to have a large amount of keratin associated with it because it makes it quite hard and structurally sound. We can actually diagnose some conditions, some diseases, based on the shape or the health of the nails. You can see it. And flat nails, like humans have, are an evolutionary trait, evolutionary trend, which allowed humans to survive. So we don't have claws or rounded hooks or claws like you'd see on other mammals. Flat nails have been an evolutionary advantage for us as we change through time. Now, if we look at the skin, if we look at each other, we all know we don't all look alike. We can be different colors, and we can have changes in our skin. So looking at the skin, just simple observations can often give us some indications of condition of the body. One thing that we can look at is the color, is the pigment. A change in pigment can indicate several different conditions. Now, the skin gets its color from a pigment called melanin, and depending on how much melanin is present in the skin, you can get a very dark color skin or a very light color skin. So the presence or absence of melanin can indicate certain conditions. You can also have hemoglobin, which is a pigment that we see in the blood, and that can cause the skin to be different colors as well. Flushing, where the skin becomes really, really red, means there's blood vessels dilated close to the surface of the skin, so we're seeing the red color through the skin. You can also have cyanosis when you're not it could be quite cold and cause cyanosis, or you can be deprived of oxygen and your skin color is gone a pale or a blue color. Cyan, the root word cyan there means blue, so blue skin. So that's one condition. Carotene is another pigment that we have in our skin. We find it in carrots and orange and yellow vegetables. It has an orange or yellow color. And if you eat too many of these vegetables, you can actually change your skin color, and it can indicate some type of, or in some cases, it can indicate some type of metabolic inefficiency. So skin changes color to yellow or orange. It can be indicative of your diet or some type of metabolic inefficiency. We can also have bile pigments that will get released from the liver and travel to our skin. So there's a condition called jaundice or jaundice, and that comes from the French word jaune, which means yellow. And this will cause the skin to become yellow. And very often, if you see someone who has jaundice, it means that they have some problem with their liver. We can also have lesions on the skin. Now, a lesion is going to be some type of malformation or a difference in the skin. You can have a surface lesion, and that's going to be stuff like rashes or eruptions. Eruptions are like boils or something that results from inside the skin. And that's going to be like macules, papules, vesicles, or pustules, and you can see those in the picture on the left, on the right hand side there. Or we can have deeper lesions, such as lacerations, which are a cut or a wound that's open in the skin. You can also have ulcers or fissures, which you can also see in the picture next to it. Burns are quite common, so when we have applications of heat to the skin, we can cause damage. A very common form of a burn is a sunburn, and we get that from being exposed to ultraviolet light from the sun. It can be quite painful if you've ever had a bad one, or it can be quite mild depending on how much UV is absorbed. But it can also lead to other things like premature aging of the skin. So if people accrue or get a lot of UV exposure, it can cause their skin to appear older than it actually is. And exposure to ultraviolet light can lead to different forms of skin cancer. So we always should be careful with how much ultraviolet light we're exposed to. You'll often hear of burns referred to as degrees. So how damaging or how severe is the burn, and you'd have common first, second, or third degree burns, and that depends on how deep or damaged the tissue is because of that burn. So a superficial burn or superficial with partial thickness would be a damaged skin because of a burn, but probably not a huge burn or a huge problem. But once we started getting to deep and partial thickness, now we're talking about second and third degree burns, and that's when we've damaged the dermis or even the hypodermis, where we've got major tissue damage, and those are really severe burns. So if you have a look at this next slide, you can see burns ranging from relatively harmless but a sunburn, and then now we've got formation of pustules here, blisters. So these are like first degree burns up here. Down here we've damaged at least the epidermis because we're seeing a lack of pigment, so that would be like a second degree burn. And over here we've got damage right down into the hypodermis or even into the muscle. That would be a severe deep burn with thickness or third degree burn. Alright, so our skin is also very efficient at healing itself. So we get damaged, the cells that are actively dividing in that area will start to produce new tissue, and that tissue will heal. Sometimes if you get a large hernia, you end up with a scar. Another word for scar is a cicatrix. Or you can have a keloid, which is a raised scar. So a scar with a lot of connective tissue on top of it, which gets bigger or thicker. Now, one of the things that can affect how fast you heal are things like the blood supply of the area, if it becomes infected or not, your age. As you get older, you're less effective at healing, and your nutrition. How healthy are you in that particular time when you were injured? Repairing of the integument is based on establishing a barrier so that nothing limit infection. So a barrier will control the infection, and then keeping a wound clean and using antibacterial ointments can definitely speed up how a wound or how a damage to our integument system heals. As we age, of course, our skin is going to change. We can see age-related changes in all of these things that were listed here. Your skin tends to get quite different as we age. And these are some of the numerous conditions that we can find in the skin. Have a look through these, and we'll have a talk about them in class.